Thornton's work on this topic actually, I guess I could use the word inspired, but it prompted me actually to change my lecture somewhat. As you can tell from the title, it is very much focusing on this topic of sufficiency economy, or Sufficiency Economy in Thai, which, as you mentioned, is very much a topic of conversation or of national discourse in Thai. My own, in regard to my own identity and work, I am trained as a historian of religion, and my main field of research is Buddhism, and primarily in Thailand. So my approach to this topic, unlike most of the Western work, or work by Western scholars that has been done on sufficiency economy, which is primarily political scientists, economists, historians, I approach this from the background of my training as a historian of religion with a particular interest in Buddhism. There is a subtopic that relates to this title, and indeed that is the topic of Buddhist economics. And this has also been mentioned, but not written about extensively, because there is a connection between Buddhism, or what is referred to as Buddhist economics, and sufficiency economy. My work has been primarily in Thailand, my research, but my interests are very diverse. Most of my teaching career was in an undergraduate college in the United States, although the last few years of my career I was at Harvard University directing the Center for the Study of World Religions. But I think partly as a consequence of teaching undergraduates in a very broad program, my research interests were very diverse. So I'm very interested in issues of ritual. I've done work on a lovely ritual ceremony of the consecration of Buddha images, which is a fascinating piece of research to do, because it is an all-night reenactment of the night of the Buddha's enlightenment. And so having sat through about a half a dozen of these rituals to produce this book, it was fascinating. So my most recent work, I'm also quite interested in meditation, and I've worked with meditation teachers and done work on that. So unlike perhaps more university situated scholars who perhaps tend to focus more in a particular research area, as they say, I've been all over the map. And where I've landed right now is actually then on this topic of Buddhist economics and sufficiency economy. Now, sufficiency in Thai, or the term proponent, I have, for the purposes of my comments and in my own thinking, coined this term of enoughness. A few years ago, I gave a convocation for us at Harvard called An Ecology of Human Flourishing. And as part of that talk, I talked about enoughness. And a professor in the business school at Harvard who heard the talk was quite taken with the idea and thought that I had created this term, that this was a kind of neologism that I had created. But when I actually looked it up on the internet, I found, no, I had not, in fact, created that term, but it had been around. As you can see from the title, I'm questioning in my remarks the term sufficiency economy. What I'm questioning is the term economy or economics. Setikit is economy, Papian sufficient. And I'm questioning that terminology, which is so much a part of national discourse in Thailand now, for a simple reason, that when I was doing research on this topic in northern Thailand, I was interviewing people, I was visiting some research sites, I was collecting a lot of literature And as I went to the bookstores and looked for books on sufficiency economy, I've collected almost 50 books. There's a lot of books on sufficiency economy. And as you will see later on in my comments, I identify the terms to which sufficiency economy is applied. Your life is sufficiency economy. Community is sufficiency economy. A business is sufficiency economy. The nation is sufficiency economy. Everything is sufficiency economy. This is the way the discourse is going. So I thought, economy seems to smack of economy, of economics. So from the standpoint of all of the terms to which sufficiency economy is applied, it should be more thought of, I think, as a worldview. So later on I will suggest that rather than calling it Setigit Papian, we should refer to it in Thai as Lokatat Papian. Or if any of you work in Pali or Sanskrit, it would be Loka Dasana, which is the Thai term Lokatat. Lokatat Papian, a sufficiency economy, or a sufficiency worldview, a way that all of these entities to which Setigit Papian is applied understand themselves and the world and act then in relationship to that worldview of sufficiency. So sufficiency, I thought, well, enoughness in this regard then might be a more appropriate term. This is overlooking the valley in which the city of Chiang Mai in northern Thailand is located. How many of you have been there? Good. It is the second largest city in Thailand. It's I first went there in 1957 when it looked more like Luang Prabang now than what Chiang Mai looks like now. Its development has been spectacular the last few years. And part of the question in terms of establishing a setting that I want to raise is what has been the impact of modernization and globalization on Thailand over the past, for me, 50 years, because I was in Thailand and in Chiang Mai initially in 1957, which is over 50 years ago. So, Chiang Mai in those days looked something like this. Idyllic, bucolic. In part I show this because part of the rhetoric of sufficiency economy seems to harken back to a kind of bucolic, idyllic age, when life was simpler, when we all loved one another, we worked cooperatively, we didn't compete for the dollar or the baht, as the case may be. What I need to do now, and I've not done this, is develop a set of images of where this used to be, because this is now, sorry Nancy.
I think I know.
Yeah.
It's where the superhighway.
It's where the superhighway.
4-lane superhighway, the ring road around Chiang Mai.
That's right. This is now
right there,
all
right where that water is.
right.
And everything behind it is box stores.
This lady who just interrupted me is my wife.
Sorry. Just picture that 4-lane.
And this was very much the Thailand that I grew up in, as it were. The challenge then, or the issue that I'm posing in terms of the context in which sufficiency economy is being promoted, is then the challenges, as I've mentioned, of modernity, of globalization, the happy nuclear family, the high-rise structures in Bangkok more so than in Chiang Mai, the traditional market, which you can still find, but perhaps it's being overwhelmed by modern consumerism. So part of the impact is what the next few images then illustrate. The industrial development in the industrial complex outside of Lampung, which has created all kinds of environmental problems. This is all from the Bangkok Post. So we can talk about the social and sort of cultural dislocations that accompany the kind of rapid change that a country like Thailand has undergone, as these few images represent. Well, what about traditional Buddhism? And one obviously can still go to Thailand. That sometimes seems a little anomalous, being in Bangkok particularly, and on a crowded street, seeing barefoot saffron robe monks wandering down the streets. Or that image, the title of the lecture image, where you have the monk taking money out of the ATM machine. Shouldn't we be giving material things to monks? Keep this in mind. There's a slide here that will raise that question. So if we think about traditional institutional Buddhism in Thailand, perhaps in an idyllic sense or an idealized sense, we think of something like this. A very famous Dutanga monk in northern Thailand who wandered for many years the hills of northern Thailand, the Shan states, into Laos, who as he grew older found his wandering days becoming more problematic and was invited then to reestablish an old traditional monastery outside, or in Basam, outside of Lampung. So these images then are conveying this sense of what was, and still is to a certain extent, traditional Buddhist practice. So apropos the lead slide, the title of the lecture slide, where you have the monk putting his ATM card in the ATM machine. This is what we think of in terms of traditional Buddhist practice. Going out on the morning alms rounds or Bindabad. Monks chanting, monks meditating, monks studying. To a certain extent, again, in terms of an idealized vision of the monk and the monastic life, withdrawn from the world. Now, those of us who do field work in Thailand and Buddhist countries know that institutional Buddhism is a lot more than this. But in terms of I think the ideal construction of Buddhism, these images, I think, are a fair representation of that. So how then does institutional Buddhism in a country like Thailand respond to the pressures and the forces of modernization, of globalization, of materialism, of consumerism, and so forth? That's the question. This is, for those of you who have been in northern Thailand and in the Chiang Mai area, if you've never gone up to Chiang Dao, there is what for me, in a way, personifies this idealized Buddhism. It is a marvelous cave monastery on the backside of Doi Sutate Mountain in Chiang Mai. And it was established by a disciple of Pratan Man, a monk who was looked upon as the founder of the modern forest monk tradition in Thailand. Now, what about one way of then answering the question or addressing the question of how does Buddhism respond to modernization and globalization is in terms of what's going on the ground. So these images, before I go to look more substantively at Sufficiency Economy, which is, I think, one response, too. To see what are some of the things going on the ground, and here are a couple of examples. This is a monk now deceased, very, very distinguished monk in Tamayut denomination or sectarian tradition of Thai Buddhism, affectionately known as Bhumbol. He was the abbot of a major monastery in the city of Chiang Mai, Wat Jedi Luang, which is sort of the headquarters monastery of this particular tradition, monastic tradition in Thailand. But he also established a monastery outside of Chiang Mai in a kind of what is now a sort of suburb of Nha Rim, the monastery known as Wat Dara Pirom, on what had been an old crematory ground. Now, that itself is interesting and unusual, because there are still in Thailand, and indeed in many cultures, lots of taboos surrounding death, surrounding cremation, and to build a wat, establish a monastery there, in a sense, it bears a testimony, a witness to how innovative he was. Initially, the grounds have changed considerably since I took these slides, but initially it looked something like this. Not elaborate monastic residences, but sort of simple wooden structures. There were, most of the plantings were in fact fruit trees and other agriculturally significant and edible plants. Yes, whoops, let me go back to that. And his image hall here, which was a more traditional shrine or image hall. And he establishes, as these notes say, the foundation for education and development of rural areas in 1974. And by 1996, FEDRA, the acronym, had sponsored projects in 89 villages in 3 provinces that included rice, water, buffalo banks, and cattle banks, a credit union, co-ops, and educational projects to train village youth in modern agricultural techniques and marketable vocational skills. So here was one on-the-ground response. Let's try to keep young people particularly in their context, as it were. It was a version of localism. There are a number of terms that come out of Western academic discourse that apply to this, localism being one of them. And as you can see, he was reasonably successful. Now, since then, there have been a lot of changes, and the American scholar who's done a lot of work on this area, known as the sort of title of these kinds of monks were development monks, patana, and this has not sustained itself in a major way, in part because, again, of the kinds of changes that are taking place in Thailand. So here are some FEDRA volunteers at the monastery. This was a kind of domestic peace corps using an American sort of example in this regard. Some of the local skills, artisan skills or industrial skills that were developed were the making of saw paper, which is still a major commodity in Thailand. Saw paper albums of all kinds, stationery. Weaving. This is a young girl weaving on a backstrap loom. So that's one response, if you will, institutional response. Another is a movement which came out of the 1970s. And the 1970s is a critical period, by the way, here, or roughly from the mid-60s to the mid-80s. There were lots of developments that took place on all kinds of levels, here the economic level. And Buddhism, new Buddhist movements, for example, in Thailand, this is one of them. This movement known as Santia Sok, again, came out of the 70s. This very controversial monk, Samana, I have prop here, but he's now a Samana. I won't go into that, but there was a very controversial monk who established this movement. which has its own kind of independence that we won't go into. But it was a radical movement in virtually all respects. The advocacy of a very, very reduced, simple lifestyle. In fact, I have Thai friends whom I've talked to and asked about Buddhist economics. Well, I said, well, tell me about Buddhist economics. And they would say, well, the real Buddhist economics is in Santiago. As you can see, quite simple living quarters, eating one vegetarian meal a day, being virtually 100% organic, producing a number, they have a commercial enterprise, producing lots of organic, particularly organic products, not simply fresh, but also other products that are canned or bottled, and which they sell at a very, very low price, or give away, or sell below price. So it is, from an economic point of view, of course, as well as from a lifestyle point of view, very different from mainstream Thai culture, from mainstream Thai lifestyles. Much of their critique of Thailand or Thai culture is not simply their lifestyle or a minimalist, non-consumptive, organic agricultural model, but again their critique of Thai culture, critique of violence, critique of consumerism. And then in terms of economics, Samana Bodhirak has propounded this philosophy of what he calls meritism, and I think it speaks for itself. I apologize for the spacing, which kind of got a little screwy here, but let me go over this very quickly. So Bun Niyom, or meritism, moderate economic growth, an emphasis on the spiritual rather than the material, the criteria of success rather than wealth. It is in fact oriented not toward mundane pleasures, but detachment from material things. Let me go down this very quickly. Instead of luxury, it's the emphasis upon small. Instead of selfishness and competition, it's an emphasis upon generosity. Oh, this is really fouled up. In terms of activities, instead of more work, it's less work. In terms of environment, it's protection in terms of pollution. So, if you will, the philosophy of Bun Niyom, or meritism, is the economic philosophy that undergirds Santiago. Now I'd like to turn my attention more then to thinking about Lokatatpapian, or sufficiency as a worldview. I've already mentioned that I coined this term, Lokatatpapian, or sufficiency worldview, as a result of my research in the early months of this year, and especially all of the literature that one finds applied to these various, if you will, aspects of life. So we talk about the sufficiency life. There's a rather large volume that's the biography of the former rector of Chiang Mai University, who's now a member of the Privy Council, the title of which is Chivit Papian, The Sufficiency Life. Now, the fact that he is a very highly placed civil person and obviously is not wanting for material goods is perhaps beside the point, at least in terms of my comments. There's a sufficiency community. Part of my research was, in fact, visiting a sufficiency community. Now, they were outside of Chiang Mai. It was a kind of demonstration community. One might look critically at this. They would have groups come in to study, as it were, the ways in which they were a sufficiency community. And it wasn't just in terms of what they produced, a kind of integrated sort of economic wherewithal, but it had a very strong ethical and moral emphasis. Our villagers don't smoke very much. They didn't say they don't smoke, but they don't smoke very much. They don't drink very much. So there were these kinds of lifestyle issues that were behavioral issues. The sufficiency nation. Now, most of the attention that has been given has been really, I think, at the national level, at national development. How is a sufficiency economy reflected in national development, especially, for example, as it might be embodied in agriculture? So there is a considerable critical literature that I'll be referring to that focuses principally on that. And part of the question that I want to raise about the way in which Western scholars in particular have written about sufficiency economy is that it is focused very much in this area. So the question that I'm posing to people like Soren is if we broaden the purview of the study and we look at all of these nouns to which Setikit Papian is applied, individual, community, nation, agriculture, business, education, might we not think about it in a different way? And I'm saying yes, we should, and that it's more appropriately then thought of as Lokatak Papian rather than Setikit Papian. So if I only have one point in this lecture, by the way, and if I have anything original to say, it's perhaps in coining this word, which I'm not sure, I think there are a couple of Thais here, may wonder about this term, Lokatak Papian. Now, because of the broad application of the term, not only am I suggesting that we should come up with a new terminology, Lokatak Papian, but it is being promoted as a way of being Thai in the 21st century. So to be Thai is to be Papian. To be a businessman is to be Papian. To be a privy councillor is to be Papian. To be a businessman, an agriculturalist, to be whoever is to be Papian. So this is what I'm pushing, which I think is very consistent actually with the work that's being done by historians of political science and scientists in economics. I think that Soren would agree with me. But if we sort of approach the subject and look at it this way, then kind of where do we go from here? Well, what about Papian? Are you Papian? Am I Papian? But how much is Papian or sufficiency or sustainability or non-excess or, gosh, global warming is wrecking the world, we need to change all of our habits, we can't consume as much? What I'm suggesting then here in terms of Setikit Papian or Lokatak Papian, it isn't just Thailand. It certainly isn't just the king. But it's everywhere. It is global. This is a part of the global, an important part of the cutting edge of global discourse. So part of the genius of Papian or Setikit Papian is that it taps in to what is global sentiment. What's going on? It's not unique to Thailand, it's not peculiar to Thailand, it's not unique to Asia or Southeast Asia, it's everywhere. To be Thai is to be Papian, to be Thai is to be global. Thailand and Thai people are part of the global network today. But Papian is also Thai. It reflects Majjhima Patipata. It reflects Buddhism as a middle way. It reflects Buddhism as non-excess. And we could go on. Buddhism as the middle way defined by the Eightfold Path. What is the Eightfold Path all about? Well, it's about Four Noble Truths. It's about life. Is suffering or unsatisfying? How do we make our life? How do we overcome suffering? Or how do we make our life more satisfying? We embark on the Eightfold Noble Path. the very fulcrum of which, or center of which, is right livelihood. What is right livelihood? Right livelihood is to be Papian. It's moderation, nothing in excess. So, part of the genius, I think, of this ideology, is it an ideology? Or, in my paper, I refer to it as an icon. We look at an icon, it's not spelled out. There isn't a definition of the icon beneath the icon. We respond to the icon. It evokes in us something. It evokes Papian. So Papian as an icon evokes Papianness. So to say to be Thai in the 21st century is to be Papian. My Papian might not be Soren's Papian or Nancy's Papian. That's part of the genius of it. Its very ambiguity is part of its power. It's like water that we pour into a glass. It takes the shape of the glass. So, Papian, I respond to Papian. I feel I'm Papian. I'm Thai. Yeah, I think so. I think this is the way it works today. Or not. This is my argument. So it's therefore an ethic, primarily an ethic or a value term, rather than an economic term. Now, the role of king in this has been extremely important. In particular, what has been highlighted is a speech that the king made on December the 4th, 1997, his annual birthday address. And the quote that is lifted out of that speech most frequently is the following. Recently, so many projects have been implemented, so many factories have been built that it was thought Thailand would become a little tiger and then a big tiger. People were crazy about becoming a tiger. Being a tiger is not that important. The important thing for us is to have a sufficient economy. A sufficient economy means to have enough to support ourselves. Now that speech was elevated and highlighted as being the critical moment in the development of the philosophy of Sethikit Papian. Now, as people like Soren and other scholars have pointed out, and indeed as has been promoted in Thailand, oh, the king this didn't simply come out of the economic crisis of 1997. This has been what the king's been about from the very beginning. We can go back to the 50s even, but certainly from 1974 onwards, where the king began establishing development projects, agricultural development projects around the country, 3,000 of them or more. The development of major study centers, 6 of them throughout the country, and began a number of his speeches then began being mined for themes of sufficiency economy. In fact, if you have an opportunity to visit the Crown Property Bureau, there is a Sethikit Papian room there, in which there are television monitors in which you can access the king's speeches, which in fact then develop this whole long lineage of Sethikit Papian comments the king has made. Now, I don't want to take anything away from the importance of the way in which the king figures into Sethikit Papian. It is critical. But if we step back and look at it from a broader historical, critical point of view, this is a particular moment or a particular expression of something, as I've already said, is part of the global discourse. So we don't need to reiterate all of the issues, again, the way I began my comments, that have provoked this incredible flourishing, not only of speeches and literature, but movements in this period. The global crises of the depletion of natural resources, global warming, of undermining local economies, of the erosion, and not just the environment, but the erosion of social communities. Nancy and I just heard a talk by a Danish diplomat and economist who the projection of food shortages in the next 20 years, particularly water depletion, is scary, really scary. And, you know, what are we doing? Are we going on just sort of merrily, you know, we roll along? What are we doing in any significant way? Say to get Papian. That's what we ought to be about. Papian. So what are some of, I mean, you know, we could all come up with 20 examples of responses then to these crises, just to name a couple. Greenpeace comes out of the 70s. It should be one word, sorry about that, I didn't correct that spelling. Silent Spring, perhaps in terms of change, one of the most important books ever published, because it led to the whole problematizing of toxic sprays like DDT. Small is Beautiful, of course, for Buddhist Economics. E.F. Schumacher's book, published in 1973, declared to be one of the 100 most significant books published since World War II. The importance of small and beautiful in terms of Buddhist economics, or in terms of the King translated into Thai, the chapter in Small is Beautiful on Buddhist economics. So clearly it influenced him. In Thailand, I mentioned, well, the slides of the development monks, or there's a whole other group of monks referred to as ecology monks, or Prat Nak Anurakpa, monks who conserve the forests. So again, or outside of Thailand, some of you may be familiar with the Sarvoja Shramadana movement. Actually, A.T. Aryaratna, the founder of that movement, his work began, he was a private school teacher in Colombo, and on the model of a Quaker work camp. He took his students to work in a village outside of Colombo. Since then, he's worked in 11,000 villages around the country. He's developed an economic philosophy called the No Poverty Society. Much of what one finds in Setikit Papian, one finds in the ideology, or what A.T. Aryaratna and Sarvoja has said. Again, not to take anything away from the importance of the King, but it is not original with the King. In fact, we could go back to what was called Buddhist socialism right after the end of World War II, the end of the Western colonial period in Southeast Asia. We look at people like S.W.R.D. Bandaranaike in Sri Lanka, or U Nu in Burma, and the development of what was called Buddhist socialism. And we found ideas that are very similar. So this has been going on for a long time. And perhaps the best known example, particularly in Thailand, but probably in the West as well, is Bhutan's philosophy of gross national happiness, which again, as with Setikit Papian, values, the sort of mantra here is it values human development over economic development, over material development. Now, there are a number of examples. I don't want to, this could go on and on. I'll try to not to go on. There are a number of examples of Buddhist economics which tie into this. We've already mentioned Schumacher's Small is Beautiful. He does a lot in that book. In many respects, to see that book only in terms of the chapter on Buddhist economics is very unfair to the book, because the book as a whole does a lot of other things, some not quite as powerful, I think, as the chapter on Buddhist economics. But in that, part of what he does is critique the Western economic view of work. We work to make money to buy things. But his view of work is work should be all about self-development and the development of others. It's all about human development, which, by the way, ties into the subtitle of the 2007 UNDP report on Thai development, which focuses on Setikit Papian. It's about human development. It's about human development, not just material development. Perhaps in Thailand, one of the best known books by a Thai scholar, by a very distinguished Thai monk who has had so many titles, so his name keeps changing, but now by and large he's referred to as P.A. Payuto, and a portion of his major book on Buddhist teachings, or Buddhist Dhamma, is on Buddhist Economics. And he cites many of the same themes. Again, Buddhism is a middle way, non-excess, and in terms of economics, he's very concerned about, again, as with Schumacher, this distinction between work and labor. So work then is looked upon negatively to make money to buy things. The less we can work to make the most money is the best model, rather than looking upon work as how would all of our work, whatever it might be if we saw it primarily in terms of human flourishing. If we looked upon it in terms of life satisfaction, and not defined primarily in material terms. The person who has most recently in Thailand written most extensively about Buddhist economics, especially as it's tied into sufficiency economy, is Dr. Apichai Puntasen, who has coined this term Bunyaism. Bunya is the Pali term for knowledge. When we think of Buddhism as a path, it is the path to a knowledge which, in his case, in terms of Buddhist economics, again, constructs a more satisfying life. And again, there are certain central themes to this in Sufficiency Economy and Buddhist economics. It focuses on material and non-material, on spiritual goals rather than material goals. He actually takes a lot of the Buddhist language and framework and imposes it on, or applies it to sufficiency economy. Now, Buddhism, sufficiency economy has both its advocates and its critics. Its advocates, I have many examples of obviously people who are in government and government agencies that point to Setigetwapiying as not only the way in which Thailand is going to sustain itself as a strong political economy, but emphasize also its global relevance as well. Let me then quickly give you some examples before I come to a close on enoughness as a worldview. So as I've said, Setigetwapiying is not really an economy or an economic theory. I'm quoting from the UNDP report here, but a guide to conducting life and making decisions that can be applied to an individual, household, community, project, business, the whole world. So more or less now I simply want to flag some of those areas to which Setigetwapiying is applied. The first is agriculture, and this has received the most attention, in part, I think, because of its early association with the king, because the king's work has been primarily in agriculture. I want to cite a couple of examples that come from my own research. Let me just say that in terms of agriculture, there are two aspects of Setigetwapiying that are particularly important. One, of course, is the sufficiency part of it. That is, out of the king's model, there were kind of three stages. You develop sufficient for your own use. You then, as you manage that, you then move to producing an excess, which is then going to be used primarily horizontally, as it were, in terms of local networks. And then that third stage is, as you become more and more successful, you then might develop a vertical mention, where in fact you then have more of a market, broader economy. So that is, while the king spelled this out in a specific way, this notion of building a firm foundation to take care of your own needs is important, and that very much hinges upon diversification. Now, the king developed a model of diversification. He said the average, whether he was right or not, and this has been much debated, The average farm size was 2.54, I think, hectares. And of that, 30% should be in rice, 30% should be in pond, that is water where you raise fish, you have ducks, 30% of it should be in other crops, fruit trees, for example, and 10% of it should be for other things like your house, livestock. So diversification, if you're talking about a more or less self-sufficient foundation, there's got to be diversification. So diversification, in my view, is the critical factor in terms of the argument for moderate self-sufficiency. The other in agriculture, and for some agricultural cooperatives and network that we work with, it's organic farming. One of the, like the Rainbow Farm here that I mentioned, is a network of over 300 farmers, rice farmers, not only in northern Thailand, in other parts of the country, and even into Vietnam. And there are certain principles that they must subscribe to be a member of this, to participate in this cooperative, which has a marketing factor, obviously. From an economic point of view, we think of sufficiency in terms, or sufficiency economy, both in terms of production and in terms of consumption, or in terms of marketing. And organic is absolutely critical. This Krupatum Surya in Matang, who is a sufficiency farmer that we work with, let me read to you a little bit about from my paper. She was formerly a secondary school teacher in chemistry. She turned to farming on her family property following the model of diversification and integration of what was called the new theory. That's the one that I just talked about. In particular, she developed an alternative method of rice cultivation using organic inputs and direct seeding with the hulled rice. She used other areas of her land for pond and fish culture, fruit trees, water buffalo, and housing. She's received several national awards, including a Royal Award in 2009 for her work as a volunteer with the Cooperative Accounting Department in assisting farmers to adapt to sustainable organic agricultural practices and procedures for maintaining appropriate accounting procedures. And again, other examples. Business. Business in terms of what the King had to say about all this, or in the UNDP 2007 report, received much less attention. Without going into this in any detail, Siam Cement, which is the wealthiest corporation, I think it's the wealthiest corporation in Thailand, isn't it? It's certainly one of them. I think it is the biggest, wealthiest corporation in Thailand. And in the UNDP report, it was Siam Cement that was kind of lifted up. Consult their website. You will see they say a lot of things about sufficiency economy. But what I want to refer to is the business that I focused on, and this is Niti Foods. A really impressive owner, president, really an inspiring guy. I mean, not surprising that he's the head of one of the Chiang Mai Rotary Clubs. It's a mid-sized company with 50 employees. Niti Foods has received several Sufficiency Economy awards. By the way, the whole way the award system ties in with large corporations and the government is an interesting part of this. That the company produces a variety of dehydrated spices and vegetables. I won't go into the list. The founder-president has an MBA and was a manager of Best Foods in Bangkok before founding his own company in Chiang Mai. Because Niti Foods is a relatively small firm, Surapon, the director or the president is directly involved in all aspects of the company from production to sales. He's proud of the fact that Niti Foods has been designated as a green factory for its environmental record, waste treatment, recycling. Niti Foods has won sufficiency awards, however, regardless of its green designation. Kun Surapon simply runs the company, and this is interesting, to what he considers to be sound governance and honest, transparent business principles. Quality products by world market standards, sold at a fair price, continuous attention to research and development, fair wages and additional worker benefits that include a provident account, annual physical exams, educational benefits, bonuses, 3 annual training sessions, attention to worker safety, and a canteen. Now, what's interesting about this is that he would be doing what he's doing whether there was sufficiency economy or not. This illustrates, in my mind, my point that sufficiency economy takes its particular form or definition from the nouns to which it is appended, or these areas to which it is applied. So in agriculture, it takes a particular form. In business, it takes a particular form. In education, there are certain principles that run through it. So it is a worldview. It's like water poured into a container. It takes the shape of the container. So Kun Siripon, yes, I'm Papian because I'm a really good businessman. I pay my workers a fair wage. I give them health benefits. I give them this, that, and the other thing. That's what good business should be. So that's Papian. That's Papian. And that's not a bad thing. I don't say that necessarily as being critical. Now, I think in terms of education, in terms of changing the way people are, and this, as you say in your article, in your interview with the woman who heads the Sufficiency Economy Department in the Bureau of Crown Property, Dr. Piyanut, I was on her dissertation committee, which was on Buddhist economy. And as you say in your article, what she talks about is the long-term and changing character, changing worldview, changing the way Thai people, young people, students, think about themselves, the world in which they live. So if you look at the Ministry of Education core curriculum, and you can access this on the internet as well as Siam Cement, you can see the way in which Setiket Papiang is a part of the whole curriculum. But it's tied with other things. Aware of their Thainess, aware of their Thainess, self-discipline, public interest, adhering to a democratic form of government under a constitutional monarchy. Hence, it's imperative that they be endowed with desired moral values, intelligence, and sagacity, to develop a sense of morality and public mindedness and acquire knowledge and skills essential to their lives, which leads to sustainable national development. Sufficiency, Papian, is what it means to be Thai. It means to be Thai. It means to be committed to the monarchy. It means all those other things in that list. So, that last category, individual, nation, and community, I could keep on going. And quite frankly, in preparing this talk, I ran out of time. But it simply reinforces and reiterates some of these things. I wanted to end with this slide. This is Krupatum. This is our sufficiency farmer in Metang. And I use this because she's pointing to the future. To be a little overly dramatic. This is Thailand's future. This is the global future. If we don't adopt it, and here I become a preacher, as Krupatum is a preacher, what will the consequences for any of us, not just Thailand, be? What I should have a split slide here, but I don't actually have a slide of what I would split this with. This is a very lush rice paddy. Her next door neighbor doesn't farm organically, but farms chemically. And the difference between these two rice paddies is spectacular. Not only does the use of chemical fertilizers take a lot more money, but the long-term consequences in terms of fertility of the soil is seriously bad. So, at any rate, I do think that not only have I found this extremely interesting to do work on, I guess I am a bit of a preacher about it. I'm not uncritical, but I'm not looking at the critical part of it. So thanks very much.
Thank you.